Hey guys, Zomfox here, and some news that was kind of reported, but we didn't know for sure, has been made official. It has happened. Kirby Wilson is no longer a head coach. This is one of the best football news we've heard in a while. Considering the fact this is the same day, or I think a day after, no, it's the same day as Joe Lombardi, the OC of the Chargers, got sacked. This is a great day for football fans. If you're just a football fan, great day. You're seeing guys that deserve to get fired, resign, or whatever, get their comeuppance. Let's be real. Kirby Wilson was a terrible head coach. Everyone knew from the start he was going to be bad, and he was bad. And now we do know who their coach is in Ray Horton. So before we go into what my opinions are on this, let's just look at the article from Fox Sports. USFL hires Ray Horton as Pittsburgh Maulers head coach. Pittsburgh. The USFL on Tuesday announced that NFL veteran defensive coordinator Ray Horton has been hired to lead the Maulers. He immediately becomes the head coach from Kirby Wilson, who resigned earlier this month, though we didn't know it was official till pretty much today, so that's why I hadn't done a video on it. We are thrilled Ray Horton is joining the USFL family as the new Maulers head coach, said Daryl Johnson, the executive vice president of football operations. He helped the Steelers win 2 Super Bowls as assistant coach, so Pittsburgh football fans know him. He also won a Super Bowl as a player and my teammate on the '92 Dallas Cowboys. Ray is a great leader and an even better person, and I'm excited to be teammates with him once again. Horton is 62. He gets his opportunity to be a head coach for the first time. He's leading the Pittsburgh franchise, which also makes it a family affair, as his son, Jaron Horton, will stay as the DC as he was last year. I'm humbled to join the USFL as the new Pittsburgh Maulers head coach, said Horton. We're returning a solid core from one of the best defenses in the league, which is true, including all USFL safety Bryce Tornanen and Pittsburgh native Trey Tarpley, as we look for the next great quarterback in the USFL. I'm also excited about a returning offensive core. We will stay focused on delivering a USFL championship to the Pittsburgh Maulers fans. He was born in Tacoma, Washington. His life revolved around the game of football. A legendary 1970s prep All-American player, he stayed home as defensive back and special teams returner for the University of Washington. Then in '83 he was drafted by the LA Express in the USFL, but ultimately played for the Cincinnati Bengals, who drafted him at the 53rd overall pick. After a stellar 10-year career with the Bengals and Cowboys, he turned immediately to coaching in '94. He held various defensive positions for the Washington football team, Redskins, Commanders, whatever you want to call them, the Bengals, Detroit Lions, and the Steelers. He coached on the Steelers and was part of 2 separate Super Bowl teams, and then he became the DC for the Cardinals, Browns, and Titans. Most recently, he was the DB coach for the Washington football team in 2019. Like all USFL coaches, Ray's passion in helping players maximize their talents become the best they can be, said Johnson. Ray's experience and expertise will help our players and assistant coaches succeed at the professional level. I know he will bring an excited brand of football to Maulers fans. Horton recently interviewed with the USFL's coach selection committee, which included Daryl Johnson, former NFL head coach and current NBC Sports analyst Jason Garrett, NBC Sports executive John Miller, and Pro Football Hall of Fame general manager Bill Polian. Coach Horton left a great impression on everyone on the committee, so when Kirby Wilson informed the USFL that he was unexpectedly resigning, the first phone call we made was to Ray, said Johnson. Horton replaces Wilson, who was preparing to be the upcoming USFL Season 2 until he informed the league of his decisions. Due to personal reasons, it is with a heavy heart that I have resigned as head coach of the Pittsburgh Maulers, said Wilson. I want to thank the USFL, Daryl Johnson, and the football support staff, but especially my assistant coaches and players. I had a wonderful experience during the history-making first year of the USFL. I will be forever grateful and forever a fan of this professional league. Thank you for believing me and providing me an opportunity. Johnson said Wilson was a big reason why the USFL is the first major professional spring football league in nearly 40 years to complete a full successful inaugural season, and return for a second year. I think I speak for everyone in expressing a sincere appreciation for Coach Wilson and everything he did to help the USFL complete a successful inaugural season, said Johnson. More than the head coach of the Pittsburgh Maulers, he was a mentor for other players, coaches, and staff. Kirby Wilson will always have a special place in the history of our league. The Season 2 kicks off on April 15, 2023. So yes, he is going to be remembered, but it is not for all the good things that they are trying to say. Now, naturally, there's going to be some people who believe he's not really resigning, he got fired, some are going to believe it. That's up to you to decide, but the bottom line is he's going to be remembered in infamy. The bottom line is just this chart basically shows how bad he was in a very, very easy vacuum. Yes, they went 1-9. That's not even what I have to say. Not only did they go 1-9, they lost the game to win the number 1 overall pick, which is also terrible. But here's why this is so bad. He is a running back coach. He coached running backs for almost like 20 years in the NFL. That's all he did, was literally coach running backs. In theory, this team's running game was going to be great, right? Because the whole idea was he was going to build a strong O-line with great running backs. Well, you had Pizzagate, which was De'Veon Smith, who was literally one of the best players in the USFL to most people, kind of like Tamu, how heading into the year he's viewed as like the best player of his position, got cut from the league because he wanted to have pizza instead of chicken salad or whatever it was, and Kirby was the one who ended up getting rid of him. That was the first huge thing about Kirby, and then you had the constant quarterback change, not to mention the true failure that was the running game. The Maulers finished 7th in rushing yards, 7th in rushing yards per attempt, and 7th in rushing touchdown. They were also 7th in their longest rush. So overall, they were just bad at running the ball. And it's not even like they were terrible. Garrett Groshek was very solid, and so was Madre London. But overall, their running game just wasn't that good. You know what would help? A constant quarterback would be really nice. But Kirby Wilson also hated the idea of sticking to a quarterback. Yes, there are a lot of instances where a team will stick with a quarterback for much too long, but this was the opposite. He changed quarterbacks what felt like every other week, from Kyle Lauletta to Josh Love to Vad Lee to Roland Rivers, and it was constant, just no reason. Vad Lee won him a game, the only game of the season, and less than 2 weeks later, he was already on the bench for Roland Rivers. Look at this, you had 4 QBs start games, and this isn't like because of injuries. No, this was straight up just constant benching of players. And what's going to be funny is if any of these guys end up being great next year for a different team, because there's a lot of people who do believe in Josh Love and some of these guys, and it really is insane. This team's passing game was horrid. This team just overall was bad. Look at those quarterbacks. Vad Lee had the most touchdowns with 6, because he did start in 4 games, and he played in 6, but he also had 6 interceptions. Love had 2 picks, 2 touchdowns. Roland Rivers had an only positive TD interception ratio of 2-1, but you look at his completion percentage was 50%. All 4 quarterbacks, yes, they did not play that great. Vad Lee had a game, but was really solid. But overall, if you're not going to keep the quarterback there, how are they going to be able to get a great repertoire of people? A reason why a quarterback that's a backup that becomes a starter in any other league does well is usually because they give him one of his receivers that was a backup. You have that connection from practice. These guys wouldn't have that because they kept changing. Then not to mention you had the Gaither being in and out a couple weeks and stuff like that. But having a solid running game would have helped all these quarterbacks out, and it would have been great the other way. But instead, they kept changing quarterbacks, had a terrible running game, and they finished as the worst team in the league. And because of how they wanted to counter tanking, they don't even get the number 1 overall pick. Kirby Wilson was the worst coach by a mile. The best way to put it is the worst traits you could say about Jeff Fisher were probably some of Kirby's better traits as a coach. Everyone knew he was a terrible coach, and it's a great thing he's gone. Now, if he was an OC, I could see it maybe working. He might be one of those guys like a Todd Bowles in the NFL. As a head coach, he's not that guy. But as a coordinator, he is that guy. Just like Todd Bowles. We've seen twice now in the NFL that Todd Bowles cannot be a successful head coach, but as a defensive coordinator, he is a genius. That's probably kind of what he is. He's better as a lower-end guy. He's just not built for a head coaching role. As for Ray Horton, now we get to talk about this. Before I say this, I already did my top 8 coaches. I'm gonna basically do a summary of what I'm about to say as a comment in that video. I still believe the Maulers have the worst coach in the league, but this isn't for the same reason. It's a very simple reason, and I think it's very obvious. Ray Horton has literally not done any coaching since 2016, aside 1 year. 2017, no. 18, no. 20, no. 21, no. 22, no. 5 of the last 6 years he has not been in coaching. He is the worst coach in the league. But the gap isn't as big, and this is solely due to the fact that he has not been a coach for a while, and that when he was a DC, he wasn't the best. The one thing about him is this guy was a defensive back, and his defensive backs have been great. He was a defensive back coach for a long time in the Steelers. You know, you had some great defensive backs, mainly you have Troy Polamalu. But as a DC, he was always a very solid passing defensive guy. He was top 5 in passing defense once and top 10 3 times, and actually includes the one top 5. So 3 separate occasions he had a top 10 passing defense. Now the counter to that is what's ironic. You went from a guy who was supposed to be a great running back coach who sucked at running back to a guy who sucks as a defensive running guy. Because his teams were bottom 3 in rushing defense 3 times, bottom 10 4, so one more time, and his defenses were overall bottom 5 unit twice, though those are mainly due to how bad his rushing defense was. This guy has proven that he's a very, very, very solid pass defensive guy. As you're talking about the Cardinals in 11-12, the Browns in 13, Titans for a couple years, and the Browns again. Aside from really Pat Pete, there's no insanely notable guy that you can think of off the top of your head that you go, wow, that's a really great guy that he had. So overall, he was able to craft some really good passing defense teams, but not so much on the rushing side. Now, the fact that he hasn't been coaching in a while is definitely questionable, and is why I would say I'd still have him 8th, just because it's hard to put a guy that hasn't coached pretty much like at all in the last 6 years ahead of even Jeff Fisher, who, yes, was not great. He was pretty bad last year. But the only reason I say that is just because this guy hasn't really coached. It's not like DiFilippo where he took like a year off. This guy hasn't coached in years. But I mean, I guess we'll see for sure about him. He's definitely an upgrade over Kirby Wilson. And Maulers fans, you should be thrilled. You finally have a coach that isn't Kirby Wilson. I mean, I don't think I've seen anyone say anything really good about him in terms of the coaching side. Now, I did say before that his biggest reason I believed he was still a coach and why the league hadn't told him to, leave was because he definitely did help. The bottom line is, yes, a lot of what Daryl Johnson said is true. The fact is he will be remembered. Now, is he going to be remembered more in infamy than, graciousness? Of course. But he still did help the USFL get through its first season, and for that you do have to, thank him for that. And you got to thank him for Pizzagate. That was so funny. The fact that was on the first episode of United by Football was that classic image, that classic scene. It was great. I don't think we've seen anything in football in a while until that point that was that just insane, where you're like, wow, he really did that. It was great. This has been ZomFox. If you enjoy this content, when we notify you when I upload any videos, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell, and as always, have a great night.
Look, it matters. It's done. It's done. I appreciate you sharing it. But good luck.